Hey guys, what's up? Remo here with another PTR balance feedback video. That's right, another one. The last one I posted was 2.5 weeks ago, something like that. And in fact, it's still the same PTR, still kind of the same patch, because Blizzard has decided to do further iterations of that patch, and last night the news dropped of how some changes are being reverted, some are being adjusted, and a lot of new ones are being added. I think this is what we really got caught by surprise, how we got caught by surprise. A lot of new things were added in, and seemingly Blizzard has been listening to a lot of the community, to a lot of the feedback that was given, because yeah, lots of new changes are being introduced. Something we didn't, a lot of those we didn't talk about at all before. We're going to take a look at what those new changes posted last night are, but first I want to explain exactly how this works, because it's a little confusing, because in the newest post, not all of the final changes, not necessarily final, but currently planned changes are involved. So I guess the best way for me to explain this to you is to show you. So let's head on over to the blue posts on the Blizzard forums from Blizzard. So this was 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks ago, I guess, when it was first posted. The first post here about the 1.32.9 balance changes. This we had a few weeks ago already, where humans' towers were getting buffed against summons, Blademaster Mirror Image was getting buffed, TC Stomp was getting nerfed a lot, Undead Tower nerf, Destroyer buff, Cryptlord nerf, DK Aura nerf. And now, in the changes we're gonna see, some of these things will be touched again and adjusted. For example, Destroyer will be adjusted a little bit, DK Aura will be adjusted a little bit, but some others are not mentioned. So keep in mind, the things that are not mentioned in the next one, like the Blademaster Mirror Image buff, will still go through. It will not be touched, not changed to the B version, the newest version of 1.32.9. So try to keep this in mind. So once again, we go quickly here through these changes that we talked about before. Wisp, Detonate, this one will be getting adjusted. Druid of the Claw, Damage will not be getting adjusted. So this seems to be remaining the same. Friendly Fire on the Chimeras also not getting adjusted, so this should remain the same. And Helm of Valor Medallion also, this should not be adjusted for the newest version of the patch, and same for the claws. So a few things here will be getting changed on the newest version, a few others not, but they should still be going live from what we can understand. This wasn't 100% made clear by Blizzard, but that seems to be only logical. So this was 3 weeks ago. A few significant changes, but not too many. And then, as I said, last night, the big news dropped. Lots of changes coming in. We'll first read the opening statement here, what the developers are telling us. So let's go through this. We would like to thank everyone for providing very valuable and passionate feedback. This is about the changes 3 weeks ago. Going into the first iteration of the PTR, you can see they are looking to further adjust and tweak the numbers, maybe even add some other things. The Warcraft team knew some of the balance changes may have been too extreme. Yes, absolutely. We were very vocal about this. Wisps especially, TC Stomp especially, and some on the undead side as well were too severe. However, we wanted to test the impact of the changes and gauge the community feedback. Interesting approach. So they intentionally threw out numbers which were too extreme to see if the community would revolt, kind of, and speak up against them. Is that the way you're exactly supposed to do balance? Try to figure out what the common consensus is? Because what everyone thinks is proper isn't necessarily proper. But at the same time, of course, you really want to listen to what the community is giving you as feedback, but not every held opinion is necessarily the right one. But I guess it's definitely better to listen to community than to not listen to the community. In today's iteration of PTR, we're scaling back some of the changes, as well as including some additional changes that were highly requested. Please remember these changes are a work in progress and subject to change. Of course, this is PTR. It's all subject to change. And here, very interestingly, we plan to do one more balance pass before this patch goes live. Meaning, the changes proposed here, this is my understanding of it, will be reviewed once again, and numbers will probably be adjusted in some cases once again before going live. That's very promising. They're putting a lot of work in trying to get this patch right, and I think some of these changes do require another look at once again. So this is all the preamble here to get us ready for the actual changes. So once again, we had changes before 3 weeks ago. We gave feedback. Blizzard is reacting to that feedback and adjusting a lot of these things. But remember, some changes are unmentioned right now here, which should still be going live. Mirror image on the Blade Master, for example. Burrow removed on the Beetles, for example. Chimera friendly fire removed. Another example. So let's get into it. We start off with human once again. Last time around, a lot of people, myself included, were complaining that human was not getting any nerfs at all, while all other races were getting nerfs where they were too strong. When human had issues where they were too strong in certain aspects of the game. Mass breakers being too strong, and slow against Night Elf, especially the matchup against Night Elf, being a problem in the late game. And we will see this will actually be getting addressed, which I'm very happy to see, but let's go through it one by one. Arcane Tower change is being reverted. They had intended to increase the damage against summons, but are now going back on it. A lot of feedback that came in was that humans' biggest problem is against undead, which is certainly true, and the early undead harass with DK and skeletons is normally the most painful thing for human when he's trying to set up an expansion. At that time, so early, there's never an Arcane Tower ready at the expansion. So this change would not be helping with probably the biggest problem for human in the game at all. And they realized this as well, which I think is a very smart choice. I spoke in favor of the Arcane Tower buff because I thought human needed some help with their economy, but certainly realized that it didn't help against the early undead pressure. Now they are going for a different direction, trying to, instead of increasing the tower damage, increasing the peasant HP by from 220 to 230. Which is definitely going to be a bigger help against the skeleton harass. And they mention it here as well. Increased HP should give peasants more survivability before an Arcane Tower can be built. Exactly. And here they say the previous change didn't fulfill the purpose of helping in the right situation, especially against undead, I imagine, was implied. I think this is good. Humans' economy, I stated this before, is the most vulnerable in the game. Orc economy in the past has been buffed and strengthened with reinforced defenses on tier 2. A good development for the game, less lame, more interesting army interaction on the map. Same for undead. Acolyte buff and Ziggurat buff strengthened the economy, made undead less susceptible to lame play, leading to more straight up, interesting games, fewer frustrating games. Human economy was the most vulnerable. Night Elf economy wasn't really touched much, but with the nature of Moonwells always able to heal wisps and the entangled gold mine always protecting wisps as well. Normally, Night Elf is fine in that regard. Human needed a bit of help, and the 10 HP here, I think, is a good change, but it's not only necessarily defensively. Acolytes and peons, you pretty much can only use defensively, cannot use them aggressively to power an attack, unless in very weird situations. But with peasants, with militia being a thing, this is not only a defensive buff, but also an aggressive buff. Militia becomes stronger, big militia pushes become stronger, and the biggest worry is tower pushes become stronger. For those of you who have been around for a long time, many of you will remember, I certainly do, the years of 2008, 2010, 2012, at least 5 years, maybe even a longer period of time, where tower rushes were dominating the meta. Against Orc and against Night Elf, we saw them all the time. This strategy is not healthy for the game. It is extremely predictable and unbelievably binary. You come in with the push. If your opponent cancels your towers, you immediately lose the game. If the towers come up and over time you take out their main building, you win the game. There's very little interesting interaction between the two players. There's very, very little strategic variety. Tower rush meta is hurtful for the game, and we want to avoid that as much as we can. This is a buff to the tower push meta, which is dangerous. It's not exactly on towers, but it's on peasants, which is part of the whole tower push strategy. Fire Lord tower push, for example, against Orc, if it just gets a little bit of a nudge, it might be strong enough to once again dominate the metagame, which we absolutely do not want. I still think this change is fine, though. I think it shouldn't be too much for tower pushes to become too strong, but in conjunction with the next one, this is where it gets very worrying. Scout Tower, Guard Cannon, and Arcane Tower, so all towers, reduce repair time by 5 seconds. What this means is the total time it takes to repair from 0% to 100% is reduced by 5 seconds, effectively buffing tower repair. With that, buffing defensive play for human, holding on to their bases, which is kind of needed, against undead especially, but it also buffs tower push strategies. This is 2 tower push strategy buffs, which I think is a big, big danger. Again, we want to stay away from that being meta. It would be very frustrating and hurtful for the game, for the scene. So this, I think, is a little too much. This change I'm fine with. This one I'm not fine with. This is, I believe, too dangerous. We could roll the dice, set the patch live like this, and see if tower pushes are too strong, but then we might be suffering from a tower push meta for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, who knows. This, I think, is too dangerous. Human, with other nerfs that you'll see coming in here, needs some buffs, but if you want to target something for buffs, I would suggest not targeting this. This comes with too much of a risk, in my opinion. I have lived through years of tower push meta, and I don't want to see it again. Pretty much nobody wants to see this again. So this is the first one I disagree with. Moving on to the next one. Spellbreaker, armor reduced from 3 to 2. This is something a lot of people were asking about, and is definitely a much needed change in 2 matchups, in Human Mirror and against Orc. These units are too strong. Magic immune units should never be good enough to be masked. They have the big strength of being magic immune, so their stat line needs to be low for them to be balanced. There's no way that ever breakers should be able to beat grunts in even numbers, but they do because of the nature of slow and clap and how human works against Orc. Breakers are simply a little too strong. They shouldn't be allowed to be played in masses. In low numbers, as anti-casters, breakers should have a good spot, and they are very interesting units. They can steal spells away, a very unique mechanic. Up to 3-4 breakers, maybe 5, maybe 6 should be okay, but 10 breakers, 11 breakers, that is absolutely played in nowadays' meta, and it shouldn't be. It makes for dull games and very, very boring micro. You can't use your spells, you get slowed down all the time, especially if you're Orc. And the breakers take a lot of joy out of the game, where suddenly Stomp isn't so interesting anymore. And quite simply, it goes for all the races. Magic immune units should not be good enough to be spammed, to be masked. Destroyers were nerfed a lot in the past. They cannot be masked anymore. Good development. Dryads were also nerfed in the past with the experience increase. They cannot be masked anymore either. Outside of very few mid-game strategies, but they fall off heavily in the late game. That is good. That is the proper way, and breakers here go now a similar way. This is very healthy for 2 matchups, but it is problematic for 1 matchup specifically, and that is the already hard human versus undead matchup. This is a little dangerous. Normally, when human goes for his fast expansion against undead, they need something to bridge the gap from tier 1 to tier 3 to keep them alive, and that is very often breakers. Breakers now getting nerfed is a problem for human versus undead, where undead is already so strong. However, this is a healthy nerf overall, so I would like this to go through if human gets buffs elsewhere. And first we'll go through all the changes here, and then I will add what I think is missing in here. This is a nerf, a deserved one, but also a problematic one for undead versus human. And I think there needs to be another buff that I get to later for human. Moving on to rifles, they keep on getting buffed and getting nerfed and getting buffed and getting nerfed. It's going back and forth. So with this, now their attack speed has again been increased. Attack delay reduced. A little confusing, the wording here. This means that they once again will be doing more damage. This is the damage stat line they had when they were so strong and oppressive against Night Elf, and then they were scaled back. Now they seem to be in a better spot. But the developers' notes here for why they are getting buffed again is with the additional changes to human, we felt that this change needed to be reverted. So once again, they're saying we need rifles to be a little stronger because nerfs are coming in. And I think that is a fair argument because there absolutely are some nerfs. Spellbreakers getting nerfed, Mountain King Clap getting nerfed, only a tiny bit in my opinion though, but we'll get to that in a bit, and Sorcerers Slow getting nerfed. Siege engines, that's a different story. This is not really about human fighting potential, but it's also a nerf. Griffins getting buffed, we'll get to that later. But current staples of the human army are absolutely Sorceresses and Spellbreakers and Mountain King Clap. These all get nerfed a little bit, so Rifleman getting buffed is, I think, proper. Shouldn't be too dangerous. Some Night Elves are getting worried about this, because as I said a few months ago, before the rifle nerf again, the rifle pushes, one base pushes against Night Elf were super, super strong, and now they're worried that again these pushes might be too strong, but I think it should be okay. Of course, all of this will need some testing to get perfectly right, but nobody plays PTR, so we kind of have to wait until it goes live to really see. But we can have pretty good educated guesses for how it's gonna look. So rifles again become stronger, the Night Elves get worried about the push, but the Night Elves compared to back then have a lot of help against these pushes. Back then, bears had -2 damage. They went from really high damage to -4, then they got +1 damage, and now they're getting another +1 in this PTR again, currently planned. So they get +2 damage on the bears, and Slow is getting nerfed. This is gonna be a big deal. Blizzard says it's mainly for Orc versus Human. I think it's mainly for Night Elf versus Human. Absolutely. Orc can always circumvent Slow with Speed Scroll if they use it well, and maybe even with Breakers, with Walkers, but not really. Don't really play that anymore in the matchup, but mainly Speed Scrolls. Night Elf has a super tough time dealing with Slow. Dryads are not reliable enough, as they are quite weak, especially against rifles. This will help Bears and Demon Hunter especially, maybe even Panda, though quite unlikely. That hero sees very little play. This will be a big help. It doesn't look like much, 5% move speed, but we have learned over numerous patches that little changes matter. It's a little rifle buff, but it's also a little Sorcerer's Slow nerf, especially for the Demon. This is such a big deal. And for the Bears. So Night Elf should have better weapons now to battle up against the rifle push on tier 2, which really wasn't very interesting at all, and we correctly tried to move away from. So, as I said, Night Elves are worried about the rifles, but I think it's okay. I think Night Elf has proper answers. Exactly how that will play out, we're gonna have to see. Which, by the way, is gonna be a little hard to tell with how many changes will be coming. You will see how many it really is. Next one, Mountain King. This was asked for by a lot of people. Clap and Stomp, some of the strongest spells in the game. And we saw Clap absolutely devastating, especially in the late game with high levels. So many games in the past. No damage cap in the past. Now a damage cap is being introduced. Damage cap of 8. Meaning the max damage you do you will only deal when there's 8 targets around. If it's more than 8 targets, that max damage will be split across all the targets you hit. So you can still AoE slow and affect everyone with your debuff of clap, everything that is around you. And that is a big deal. Of course, clap is not only about damage, it's also about the crowd control of attack and movement speed slow. You still have the full effect there, but the damage is getting reduced, which is something that a lot of people were asking for. But I don't think is a big problem for the Mountain King in how we see him being most effective nowadays. The big strength of MK is playing against Orc, frontline, against the grunts in the front, and then spamming the clap one after the next. Sometimes he finds his way behind the grunts and manages to perhaps hit the Kodos, Shaman, and grunts and heroes, but you have to hit 9 targets at the same time to start feeling the nerf. In a mid-game, late-game scenario, that's very hard to reach. And in fact, I always thought Clab was by far the best against bears. When the Night Elf doesn't have a Demon Hunter, the MK oftentimes runs completely rampant with the Clab level 2, level 3, slowing down all the bears, doing good damage, but mostly controlling them, slowing them, while allowing for the rest of his army to chip them down little by little. And especially against bears, this will rarely ever become a factor. When will you ever hit 9 or more bears in one clap? Insanely rare. Bears and MGs and heroes, Dryads are magic immune. This will be against Night Elf very rarely ever a difference maker. Even when you go up against archers, sometimes you can land a good clap in the back, but normally archers have this big cone spread out. Will you ever hit more than 8 archers? Very, very doubtful. What this is a big nerf to is early game spam. Mass, footies, plus mercenaries. In that kind of situation, in an early expansion versus early expansion game, oftentimes it is this big mass of units. Big mass of tier 1. So against that, it's definitely weaker. Against mass ghouls and skeletons and beetles, it's a lot weaker. So it's not really addressing the late game power of Mountain King Clap. It's more the early game strength of when your opponent is trying to overwhelm you, which we don't see much of at the moment because the MK with the Clap can be so good against that. With this change, things like Ghoul Floods especially, or mass footy merc pushes, can possibly be a lot stronger against Mountain King first. And my biggest concern, just realized I haven't written this down yet. My biggest concern is actually the counter that this can provide against Necromancer pushes. That is not a strategy we see a lot of, but it's definitely one that can be strong in Europe, especially Krav plays this very well. Cryptlord, fast expo into gargoyles or something, and then mass necro push. There are a few cancerous strategies in the game that are extremely binary and shouldn't really have a good place in the meta. Things that are very hit or miss and very uninteractive, like pushing with tanks only, trying to kill buildings, tower pushes, liquid fire, bat, lame, abuse, and necro pushes are very much the same. The undead is sitting on 2 bases, is muscling up his big army, gets up to 80 supply, maybe 90, maybe 100, pushes with a ton of wagons and necros, and sends in insane waves of necromancers, of summons, of skeletons. And the Clab was the best answer against this. You could hit like up to 20 skeletons at the same time and do a lot of damage to them, damage that you would need to have a chance against this onslaught. This nerf right here makes the necro push strategy so much better. And again, necro push strategy are not fun. Necros have to be hoarded in the base, they're just standing there, gathering mana, statues, regenning mana, just waiting and camping and turtling for enough necros, enough wagons, and then there's one push and the game is decided right there. Can you hold as the human? You win. Can you not hold? You lose. Game over right there. Uninteractive, not good, not healthy for the game. This could be a problem for these necro push strategies, which I think is something that needs to be also nerfed for undead. Necro push. There's a few things that I think need to be added here. I'll mention that again at the end. But necro pushes, I'm saying it for the third time now, are not fun, not interactive, extremely frustrating to play against if you're the opponent, aka the human or the night elf. Orcs don't really face it much because of disenchant. Needs to be kept in mind. Needs to be kept in mind. We don't see much necro pushes at the moment, and that's good, because the strategy is not healthy for the game. But I'll come back to it later when I mention what I think is missing. Okay, moving on to the next one. Sorcerer's Slow. I asked for this for a long time. It's not a very big nerf. It's from 60 to 55, but it will help. Especially melee units, especially grunts, especially demon, especially bear, especially taurens. And it's a nerf that does not affect the matchup against undead so much. Undead has the least to worry about slow, because they have destroyers, and they are usually a very good dispel unit for a very long time until mass gyros come in, but that takes forever. Also helps with a human mirror, by the way. You might not think so, but one of the reasons why we see so many breakers is because if you don't go breakers, you get punished by slow really heavily. As slow becomes weaker, maybe fewer breakers will be required, and of course we want to see less breaker mirror in human mirror. We want to see more tier 3, where that matchup is actually the best mirror by far, I think. If human mirror goes to tier 3 versus tier 3, probably the best mirror match we have in the game. Yeah, so this is very good. This also limits strategic variety by a ton. It's so much harder to play Demon Hunter. Anything that's melee is so much harder. Playing bears is so much harder. When playing bears as Night Elf, you kind of must. It's the one reliable unit that always has a place in the late game. MGs and bears. Archers kind of, but against knights it's difficult. Chims are too pigeonholed. So this is a very, 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 very good nerf. And also another one where a very frustrating thing to deal with is getting curbed a little bit. It's getting reined in a little bit. Anything that is extremely unfun to play against shouldn't be too strong, because you are, well, forcing your player base away by making the game unfun. So this is very good. Very good. Should give a lot more options to Orc and Night Elf especially. And Siege Engine. Speaking of things that are very unfun and shouldn't be too strong. Siege engines have been a plague, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, of the Warcraft 3 meta for a long time. There used to be a time when these were spammed, when this was the meta, and they were seen all the time. Extremely frustrating to play against. No interesting micro interaction at all. They're throwaway units. The human just sends them in purely as distraction. They can wreck a base in a matter of seconds if you don't pay very close attention. They are extremely hard to kill, very, very annoying, and don't give enough experience bounty for killing them. This is now being changed. XP bounty is being increased. I think that's very good. It's more of a reward for when you finally kill these pesky tanks. This should be very healthy for the game indeed. A further note, if this is not enough, HB might be getting reduced even more, which I would be not opposed to. I have perhaps a drastic view on this. I think cancerous strategies, lame strategies as we call them, should be nerfed heavily to reduce the frustration of players within the game. Liquid fire bats, tanks, necromancer pushes as well, in my opinion, are extremely frustrating and unfun. All these should not be strong because of the detriment that they can bring to the game. I really like this, and this is also done in conjunction with the Spirit Tower nerf, or the Tower repair rate nerf that Undead will be receiving, to keep it fair, or to keep it not as lame. The concern is that mass tanks will be sprouting up more and more, and that is a strategy we don't want dominating the meta. So I very much agree with this nerf as well. And now we come to the experimental part of the patch notes. They are trying to incentivize more late game air play. Air units are very rare to see in Warcraft 3 because they take so long to come out, and because piercing damage is still very strong in the meta, and piercing damage is the natural counter to air units having light armor. So a lot of these are getting buffed. We see the first one here. Griffin Riders, build time reduced and gold cost reduced. I like this change. I think this is going in the right direction. I think they are underused. I think they might provide interesting gameplay. But this change has to be approached very carefully. This goes for Griffins, Windriders, Worms, and Chimeras. All of these will be getting buffed, as you'll see here shortly. 20 gold doesn't necessarily sound like a lot, but it can swing a lot in the meta, especially on the top level. It is so razor thin, every bit of resources that you get, every amount of value that you get from your units, everything is so super close. And air units can be very strong in a very late game scenario, so it's a tightrope act, a very difficult one, to get it perfect, to make them, to encourage more play, which I think is definitely interesting because we don't see too much of it yet, but to not overbuff them. Also, if we see more air play, we don't really know what kind of games it's going to lead to. Is it going to lead to more interesting fights? More diverse fights with a greater variety of units, with more interaction on the map, fighting for more creep camps? That would be the ideal. That is what we want to see. But that is not the only potential of air units. Air units are also extremely good, because of their mobility obviously, to harass economy. Fly in over the trees, take out the peasants, force a TP back, run away, or TP out yourself. These buffs can also very possibly lead to more lame play, less fighting, less army brawling, less interesting interaction on the map, more players ignoring each other, turtling, banking up to 100 supply, 80 supply before ever having the interesting fights. These changes that goes for all the air of all the races are dangerous. This could lead to a hit and run by lame meta, which is not what we want. We want to have more interesting army battles and more interaction on the map. We don't want to have a turtle run by harassment meta. This is not StarCraft. We want to see a hunt for items, a hunt for experience, and both players utilizing their full arsenal at their disposal to get the treasure on the map, basically. That is where Warcraft is the best. And these changes, I know I suggested these before myself. I am in favor of these in general, but we have to be careful with how we implement them. I think this is a little too much. Build time, I'm okay with. Gold cost, I think is a little too much. Again, we have to be very careful with how we implement these. We don't know what it's going to lead to. So if it was 270 gold, going from 280 to 270, I think would be better. 260, that's 20 gold. That's not almost 10%, but it's a good amount of gold that will stack up over time. That is possibly very strong. Possibly very strong. And might completely stir up the meta to something we have no idea what it's going to be. I like the idea of helping mass air, or not mass air, but late game air, but taking smaller steps I would like to see. Build time I think is fine. Gold cost I think should be a little less of a reduction. From 280 to 270 I think would be appropriate. So now we're done with the human changes. A lot of things I think properly addressed, but against undead I don't think it's enough. Especially because I think this should not go live. This is too dangerous. This is mainly designed to help defend against undead pushes. This is the intention, I'm pretty sure. Survival increase to help humans mitigate certain mid-game pushes. Well, undead pushes are rather late game, but undead pushes are the most dangerous thing. And yes, human needs a bit of help dealing with the undead push. But this change is too risky. This might lead to a tower push meta. There's other ways to help human against undead. One way is to nerf undead in a very specific way that is only going to be relevant for this matchup. And the most obvious one is Pit Lord. Pit Lord, Rain of Fire, either damage nerf or range nerf. I think range nerf would be the smarter idea. Undead uses that hero to crack the base, which is kind of a boring all-in attack, and if the Pit Lord was to get nerfed, this would help to make it a little more even. The Peasant HP already helps quite a bit against Undead, but I don't think it's enough. Breakers being nerfed, that hurts against Undead. So I think another buff against Undead is needed. As I said, Pit Lord nerf could be one approach, but there's another one which I think is a lot more interesting. For a while, with the strong rifles, which now again they are strong, humans could even play one base tier 3 tech against Undead. And that was very strong, because then human had two different options. They could go for fast expansion or one base play. Nowadays, one base play seems to be too weak, and they have to go for expansion into tier 3 and then mass Knights Gyros, trying to hold on. Also a very binary kind of game. Either you hold and you win, or you get cracked at the expansion and you lose. A way to introduce more diverse play, possibly one base play from human, is to reduce the cost of tier 3. Rifles are strong again. Rifles on one base might be playable again, with Priest and Inner Fire and so on, with Triple Hero. But it's so expensive for human to get there. If you're on two bases, you have tons of gold, and tier 3 is affordable, and Knights and all that is affordable. Their time is rather the problem. So I think what human should receive is a decrease in gold cost for tier 3, so that they can afford, that they can manage one base tier 3 more easily. At the moment, Castle Tech costs 360 gold. I think this should be reduced to 320 gold. On tier 3 with Orb of Fire, they get a good addition against Undead. Staff of Sanctuary also can be very helpful, but Staff of Sanctuary is very expensive. Not that big of a problem, perhaps, if you're on two base, but on one base, certainly. Staff of Sanctuary is 250 gold. That should be decreased to 200 gold, I believe. So with that, tier 3 tech to castle would be reduced from 360 to 320, and Staff of Sanctuary from 250 to 200. That, I think, would be a significant help to help humans play on one base against Undead and rush tier 3 just like they do, promoting more build diversity, not always having to play fast expo, but also hopefully being able to play one base tier 3. And another option is to buff Sundering Blades. It's especially strong against Undead, maybe against Night Elf, but mostly against Undead. Buffing Sundering Blades by decreasing the cost and decreasing the research time could also be a big help against Undead. In the past, I suggested giving Knight Sundering Blade by default. That would be a really big buff, maybe too much. So decreasing research time and gold cost, I think, would be a very promising option for Knights to help against Undead, to get that necessary mass of Knights faster, a little bit faster. That plus Castle, plus Sanctuary, Staff of Sanctuary, gold cost reduction. And then I think human would be in a good spot. Breakers and rifles, Breakers and Sorceresses were too strong in the other matchups, getting rightfully nerfed. But I think human needs a little more help still against Undead. And the changes I just spoke of, I think, would be the proper way to go about it. So, oh boy, that's gonna be a long video. Oh my god. I gotta pick up the pace here a little bit. That was only the first race, but I think this is the most complicated changes. The other ones are fewer and a little more straightforward. Orc, Great Hall. Supply granted increased from 10 to 11. This has been the point of discussion for many people out there. I think this change is good, but I do agree that it might be a little dangerous and that it might be a little stronger than what we want to see. The intention behind this buff is to allow for Orc to be able to scout early, especially necessary against Night Elf. Against Night Elf, the Orc must be able to find the Keeper of the Grove, otherwise he falls too far behind, Keeper dominates the game, and Orc has almost no way of coming back. They need more help with scouting. And beyond them needing help with scouting against Night Elf, it also, I feel like Orc should have an option to scout. Orc cannot afford to play a Peon Scout because they have to play 1 Burrow Tech on the top level. You could go for a 2 Burrow Tech, go for a Peon Scout, but that delays your tech so much, you cannot afford it on the top level. All the other races have good ways of scouting. Undead with an Acolyte Scout, Night Elf with 1 Wisp Scout, maybe even multiple Wisp Scouts, and Human with a Footy. Orc cannot do this. The Grunt comes out too late to scout, and normally, or not normally, but oftentimes you need him to creep at the beginning. So increasing this supply from 10 to 11, I think, is very smart and very elegant. It allows Orc to have 1 more Peon with a 1 Burrow Tech to scout. And also it comes at a cost. Orc, if they go for this, will be delaying their tier 2 tech, not by much, but by a little bit. I think this is absolutely the right approach to allow for Orc scouting early game. But of course that is not the only impact. This is where people are certainly right. This is also a buff for Orc. How much is the question in other regards? This will, for example, mean that you can now afford to go 3 Grunt into 2nd hero without needing the 3rd Burrow. In the past, you did need the 3rd Burrow. You still will have to make the 3rd Burrow after, when your tier 2 buildings come up, but you can delay the cost of the 3rd Burrow for a little bit longer, which means maybe you can afford another Circlet, another set of Heal Salves, another Claws. You can perhaps get away with a bit more item investment or any kind of investment in the early, as you won't need the Burrow so quickly along with the 2nd hero. You will still need the Burrow after, but it's a delayed cost, and that is very clearly a buff to Orc. Question is, how much? I think it shouldn't be too much of a buff. Some people disagree. This is a change, I think, that deserves testing, and to figure out if it's too good needs testing. Nobody can do armchair analysis and say that this is too strong. Obviously, it's not too weak. It's a buff for Orc. Very clearly, this is a buff for Orc in general. How much it exactly is, we will need a lot of testing for. But I think it's a well-placed buff, because Orc has been doing the worst out of all the races pretty much by far for a long time. There are 2 standout players, Lin and Fly, who are kind of on a high right now, but that is because they are playing out of their minds. Everyone else is having a really tough time. Orc remains a super tough race to play. In my opinion, the hardest. This would be an overall help, an overall buff. I think it would be well placed. It seems like Orc is the weakest race, and this is a general buff, a slight one, that doesn't make them too strong in fights, but helps a little bit with scouting and a little bit with the economy. I think this might just be the buff in just the right place to help Orc overall, a little bit. But I do realize I might be wrong. This might be too much. This might be too much if someone figures out the perfect build, the brilliant build, spending their resources just right to get that little edge in the mid-game momentum. Perhaps it's too much. This change needs quite a bit of testing to really figure out. But it has so much potential. I think it has so much potential to be exactly right that I think we should try it. Yeah, my opinion on this. Next one, TC changes. I really like these. War Stomp changes were 3 weeks ago introduced, being nerfed to 1.5 to 2.5, back from originally 2, 3, 4 second stun on heroes. This is the stun duration on heroes, not on units. On units, it remains the same. But this is why Stomp needed a nerf. It was too good at controlling both heroes and units at the same time. Especially level 3 Stomp, quite insane. It was the best spell in the game by far for a long time. Now receives another slight nerf that I think is warranted. And I think leaves Stomp in a very good position. Still very strong, but not so insanely powerful anymore. This was way too much of a nerf. I talked about this at length in my last video. This one now seems proper. In the last video I said 2, 2.75, 3.5 might be better, and it might be better. It's hard to judge what exactly the right amount is, but this was too much. The fact that you could stun multiple heroes on a short cooldown for 4 seconds. 4 seconds, multiple heroes on a short cooldown. That was just insane. So this is a lot better. And it seems like it's in a good spot with that now. And Shockwave also getting addressed. TZ has 2 active skills, along with his passives of Ultimate and Aura. And that is the Shockwave, paled in comparison. Stomp, one of the best spells in the game. Shockwave, not that good. I'm a little concerned with this because it promotes a lot of lane play, run-bys, hit and run, evasive games, boring games, frustrating games. But it's also a spell that is severely underused. So buffing it a little bit by reducing the mana cost, I think is fair. Because, yeah, the discrepancy in power of spells is insane. Stomp is insanely good. Shockwave is pretty damn bad. I think this is fair. If this leads to too much abusive hit and run strats, maybe we should revisit it again. But I don't believe it will. I think this is good. And Windrider. Here we go again. Late game air getting buffed. In the case of Windrider, it's not that late game. It's tier 2. And in fact, you can get to them pretty easily. You only require a bestiary, not even a war mill. And a lot of what I said earlier also is true for the Windriders. Piercing damage is very good against them. So there's always a counter for them easily available. So they shouldn't be too powerful to overtake. But what kind of meta they bring along with their buff, that is the dangerous thing. I talked about this for a long time up when we were talking about the Griffins. And this here is the same. I definitely agree that the build time shouldn't be reduced because at the tier 2 stage, this timing to just barely get the towers up against Windriders is crucially important. But this gold reduction here that we see is a big deal. This is a lot of gold that the orcs will be able to save, and with that, Mass Windrider, which is kind of popular on ladder already, might see more and more play. And Mass Windrider is normally extremely evasive, very uninteractive, not very fun. The orc either goes for a quick attack with 2 to 4 Windriders trying to break the base, kill the economy, and lame his way to victory, or he's going to try to get a ton of Windriders, creep the map, play PvE, ignore the opponent, use speed scrolls, run away until finally critical mass is reached. There's going to be one big fight, and there is decided in just one engagement who wins or loses. That again is not the kind of meta we want to see. However, Windriders are certainly underused, so a small buff is warranted. But the thing is, they're not unused. In fact, if you look at some of the top players, Fly and Lin, against Human especially, they have quite a solid standing in the matchup. If used properly, which is not easy to do, but if used properly, they can turn out to be very strong against Human. And this is a big buff for that Wyvern perfect golden spot play against Human, while Human is also getting nerfed on slow and on breakers. That's a lot of nerfs. TC is also getting nerfed, the Stomp, agreed, but Great Hall is getting buffed, and this, I think, like the Griffins, is a little too much. A slight buff is warranted, but this is 20 gold. This is quite a big deal. And Wyvern you play in somewhat high numbers usually. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes we also see the odd 1 or 2 Wyvern to force a reaction, but can be played in high numbers. I think this is a little too much. This is dangerous. This could lead to very uninteresting, unfun, uninteractive games with a 20 supply, a 20 gold reduction. Like the Griffins, I like the direction, but I think it's a little too much. If this was instead reduced from 265 to 255, a 10 gold reduction, I think that would be better. We have to keep in mind what these units might bring in terms of metagame. And we want to keep the game, you know, healthy and not have only run-bys for the next year. So a slower approach, a little less of a gold reduction, 10 instead of 20, is what I would prefer here. Alright, that's it for Orc, so we went through these a lot faster. And now we go to undead. Quite a few changes here. I have to remind you again, from 3 weeks ago are not mentioned. Like, wait, I guess only one. The Cryptlord Beetles are now going to have Burrow locked behind the upgrade. That was announced 3 weeks ago, which I think is very proper. Not mentioned here anymore, but relevant for what we're about to see. Destroyer, cast point, they are pedaling back a little bit on this. This was the old, so the current live patch has 0.83 cast point, which is really long delay. Then they moved to 0.5. They felt this was a little too instant of, or too fast of a delay. It's of course not instant, it's still a delay. And now they're scaling back to 0.66, which is okay. I still like it when the delay is as short as possible, but I understand the idea of counterplay and so on. Understandable. It will still be a good quality of life improvement to have a faster cast point than the original one on the Destroyer right now. I like this. This is good. Slight buff. It was already a slight buff only to Destroyer, now even slighter, so just a little bit. And now we come to Cryptlord, and this is interesting. Movement speed is being reduced on the Beetles. I think that's fair, especially with how many of them there can be. They can feel very swarmy, very overwhelming. It's not a big movement speed decrease, by the way. It's only 10 move speed. Not that big. For example, if they get Unholy Aura, they get 29 move speed, or in the future 28 move speed. So it's only 10. It's only a little bit. And to adjust for that, plus now Burrow being locked behind an upgrade, they are reverting the HP nerf. So this was the HP we had before on the Cryptlord, 330 and 490 for level 2 and 3 Beetles. Then they were nerfed to 275, 410, where the Beetles were a lot more squishy, obviously. You could deal with them a lot easier. Now they're going back. They are reverting that change. And I think that is proper in conception, but not proper in execution. Level 3 Beetles with 330 HP, we saw so many games of them. They are too frustrating, too hard to kill, and they once again make for quite an unfair and unfun meta. It's too easy for the undead to just spam Beetles, and very hard for the especially human opponents, but also orc opponents, to hold on against it. I think there can be a sweet spot found here. With the other nerfs that we saw to the Beetles, with Burrow and move speed, this is probably too weak of a health stat line for Beetles, but I'm pretty sure this is too strong. This will be still very strong. So I think a middle ground can be reached here, with nice and even numbers as well. I know some people prefer even numbers. I don't care about even numbers, but in this case, I think it would be proper. Set the level 2 Beetles to 300 HP, and the level 3 Beetles to 450 HP. And I think then we hit a very good middle ground. But this once again gives the Beetles a ton of power in the mid game. The level 3 Cryptlord in the past used to overtake so many games with hardly any chance for the opponent to do something. And with this HP change, we may once again move back to this oppressive meta, which is not the right direction. Last patch, I pleaded for Cryptlord being made viable, and I want that. And to have other options outside of DK first. It's really hard to find the perfect spot for the Cryptlord. It's very easy to over-nerf or over-buff him. I think that is the case for both these stat lines. This seems like Cryptlord over-nerfed these stats, plus lower movement speed, plus no Burrow. And this is over-buffed. We don't want Burrow early. It's too annoying. It's too frustrating. It is costs you too many brain cells. So Burrow being gone is good. Move speed being reduced is good. But the HP here is a little too high. I say that as an undead player. And I love Cryptlord. It's my favorite hero. But I want the game to be healthy. I don't want only undeads to win. I don't want Cryptlord to be so insanely hard to beat. You already need to know exactly what to do against Cryptlord. And when you do, you have a decent chance. A good chance, I guess. But this is a little too much. Again, middle ground. 300 HP for level 2, 450 HP for level 3, and I think then we may have it. Of course, we'll still need testing. We'll still need to see over the months how it looks, but I'm pretty sure this would be too weak and this would be too strong. And I've seen a lot of Cryptlord games. Also played quite a few. Alright, and here they basically talk about their thought process again. DK Unholy Aura Speed Nerf. This was one of the big points of contention of 3 weeks ago, where the level 2 Aura was announced to have been nerfed. Only level 2, by the way, not level 1 and level 3. Not nerfing level 1 is very important. It's very crucial that this goes live, staying at 10%, because the early game, the mechanics are so deeply ingrained in players. You know exactly how fast your units are. You know exactly how you have to micro. Everything is measured so razor thin. The creep routes, the distances, the time it takes. Level 1 needs to remain the same, but I agree. Level 2 was a little too strong. Undead mobility can be very, very hard late game for opponents to deal with, especially Night Elf and Human, who don't have movement speed increases. But dropping it down from 20 to 15 was a little too much. I think most people agreed. Now they're going to 17.5 and 25. I think that's proper. I think that's good. But it's also a change that affects every matchup for Undead. Undead was only really doing too well against Human, where level 4 DK would certainly be reached fairly fast, but this affects everything. Against Orc, maybe not so much, because there you go, Death Pact mostly, but especially against Night Elf, where level 4 DK is also reached fairly fast, and then Undead has to work with kiting and their move speed to deal with the Mountain Giant Taunt, Dryad Slow, Naga Slow, perhaps even Entangle. So this is definitely a noticeable nerf for Undead across the board in the late game that we'll need to keep a close eye on. I think this is proper, but it might make things very hard for Undead in the late game in army engagements with proper kiting and so on. So this is another important one to closely monitor and see how it does. I believe, and this is just my assumption, I cannot be sure, that this should be proper, but we'll have to see how it goes in the future. Out of left field suddenly comes a change that I didn't see coming. Cannibalize research by default. This is an experimental change to see if this promotes more ghoul play and creates more variety of UD openers. This is... I heard some people being very concerned about this, Grubby for example, that this might in fact make DK Fiends stronger. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, in theory, you can heal your ghouls more easily, which are getting attacked in the main, harassed in the main. But if a Blade Master is harassing your ghouls in the main, and you just have them standing still at the graveyard healing, then they are getting killed anyways. Unless you can move them behind the graveyard, behind the wall. But if they're behind the wall, behind the graveyard, they can just harvest lumber anyways, and they're safe. So I don't agree with that really, that it buffs DK Fiends at all. It does buff ghoul builds a lot. In fact, this might be a very smart idea, because Cryptlord Beetles don't really need to cannibalize. He's not so reliant on ghouls tanking the camp and then healing, because Cryptlord has the Beetles. They do that. They do the tanking. They also do the damage. This is, in my eyes, mostly a buff to Lich first and Dreadlord first with ghouls, which is pretty cool, because that is definitely very little used in the current meta and seems to be rather underpowered compared to the other openers. So this is definitely a big buff to other openers. But that's the thing. It's a big buff. It doesn't sound like much. It's 75 gold. It's a research time of, I don't even know how long. 30 seconds maybe? But that's a big deal. That's 30 seconds where you have more time to make more ghouls. 75 gold you're saving. It may open up a lot more options for first heroes, which is great, and different strategies, which is great, but this is a big deal. Late game for A-bombs, this doesn't matter. If you have 2-3 A-bombs, you can easily afford 75 gold for Cannibalize. But early game, this could make a big difference. It could be a buff in the right spot. It could also be too strong, though. It's kind of similar to the Orc Burrow, Orc Great Hall. In fact, I think this is better than the Orc Great Hall. The safer approach here would be to buff Cannibalize in reducing its cost, not giving it by default. Giving it by default is definitely risky. This could punch things out of whack in terms of balance in the early game. It doesn't sound like much, but it can be. This is very extreme. Why not go for a buff on Cannibalize? Why not reduce gold cost by 50 and reduce upgrade time by 40% or something? That is already a big buff. Reducing the gold by 33% and reducing upgrade time by 40%, that's a big buff. But this is just for free. Having it for free. Just like that, boom. Usually it requires an upgrade, now you have it for free. Big freaking buff. I think the way safer approach here would be to decrease cost and decreased research time of Cannibalize. Perhaps by a big amount, perhaps by a small amount. As I said, I think if it's 50 gold and 40% faster, that might be wiser. That might be safer. Because this comes with a risk. This change definitely comes with a risk. Okay, moving on to the next one. Gargoyle. This is something that the community has been screaming about for a long time. I think I, once upon a time, also talked about this quite a bit. Gargoyles have a new toggle ability to prioritize, which allows the gargoyle to prioritize flying units, something that was requested by the community to improve usability. When turned on, the gargoyle will prioritize air units over ground units, but you can still attack ground when you force the attack. So this is a little confusing for everyone who doesn't play much themselves, for everyone who hasn't played many gargoyle games themselves. The way it is that gargoyle AI isn't really functioning very well by itself. Gargoyle's strongest fighting potential is against enemy air, not against ground. Against ground the attack is low, against air it's very high. The reason why hippogriffs and gyros can be so strong as anti-air is they only attack air, or in the case of gyros, they prioritize air even when they have ground attack. And you can have them in one group, you A-click them into the fight, and they always prioritize air units because that's kind of the only thing they can attack, and there they do a lot of damage. In the case of gargoyles, that's not the case. If you just A-click them into a fight, then they will start attacking heroes with orb, ranged heroes, ranged units, archers and rifles and whatever, and they may ignore the air targets, griffins or frostworms or whatever, instead going for heroes or whatever it might be. With this ability, you can tell them to prioritize air, making it a lot easier to execute the micro. It's a little bit dumbing down the game, which some people are bothered by. But I think this is proper. There's enough things in Warcraft 3 to manage already. On top of everything else, giving the gargoyles the perfect command to attack every, I don't know, second, half a second is very taxing. Especially for newer players, this is very helpful. But for every player this is very helpful. And on the top level, this doesn't really matter. On the top level, gargoyles basically never get played. Gargoyles can be countered quite heavily, especially in the late game. But it might, with this change, open up more late game anti-air options for undead, where in the past it pretty much was always fiends. Maybe now more strategic variety is possible with this change, perhaps. But then again, the pros probably won't be concerned with a little bit of micro help, so I doubt it. This is a good change. A big quality of life change that is good for the game, I think. Next change, Necromancer, Unholy Frenzy, HP drain reduced. I talked about the Necromancer before. I think his mass necro push with mass skeletons should be nerfed because it's too hurtful for the game, and I stand by that statement. But other than that, the necro is very underused. Cripple can be very good, but it takes forever. Unholy Frenzy, the adept training spell, sees barely any play, doesn't seem so good. And I really like the approach here that Blizzard is taking, buffing it up a little bit and then see if perhaps it's gonna see play. Also, the way this should work is if you're standing on Blight, you shouldn't lose HP anymore, so you shouldn't lose too much mana from statues anymore, so maybe that's gonna have a helpful interaction there. But it's a little buff, not over buffing it, not risking it being too overpowering. I like this change a lot. This is very underused. Let's buff it a little. Maybe it sees play. Let's reassess in the future. And then something else I want to say about this. Ah, yeah. Also, interesting interaction, I think, between the Necromancer and the Banshee now. Because the Necromancer, in most cases, unless masked, is very weak if you only have one and only on initiate training. You can summon like 2-3 skeletons. What does that matter in the mid game and late game? But if you get higher upgrades, adept training and master training, with those buffs and debuffs, perhaps he can be very strong. Whereas the Banshee, very opposite to that design, is very strong immediately out the gate. Having 1 or 2 Banshees to just throw out a couple of curses in the mid-game can have such a big impact. So I think that's an interesting dichotomy between the two casters, where one can have very significant fast impact, and the Necromancer perhaps can have significant late impact. That could be interesting design, but the Raise Dead ability of the Necromancer is still a big problem in the game, and I'm going to address that right now or later? Yeah, right now. Whatever. Yeah, I talked about the Necro push before. I think it's too strong. When we're talking about Clab usually the best against mass skeleton summons. This unfun binary strategy of you push and you kill and you win, or you push and you fail and you lose. Very uninteractive. Necromancer has the potential to really hurt the matchup against Night Elf with the mass Raise Dead push and against human. Wisps getting nerfed is a big deal, the mana drain against the Necros, and the Clab getting nerfed is mostly against mass small units a big deal, so also against Necromancer. Necro pushes are getting buffed quite a bit, and that is dangerous. That is not good. Again, I'm an undead main, but I don't want that kind of buff that's gonna lead to unhealthy games, potentially, and I would say kind of likely. So I think with these other changes coming in, these deserved buffs and nerfs on Wisp, Clap, and Unholy Frenzy, I think we need to address the mass Necro push. I think we need to nerf it. And there's a couple of ways to go about it. At the moment, not everyone knows this, there is a max of skeletons you can have on the map from Necromancers. The max is 24. You cannot go unlimited. The max is 24. That, perhaps, should be reduced to 20. That's one way to do it. Meat wagons, they are the provider of the corpses. Their corpse generation could be nerfed. I suggested this before. Reduce the max of corpses that they can carry from 8 to 4 so that there's not unlimited corpses on the ground. So at some point, the Necromancer summoning will end. Another option right there. Also, corpse generation within the meat wagons. That is something that could be nerfed by reducing the cycle in which the meat wagon produces units. But the thing is, normally you come in with the push, and it's a lot of skeletons, and the opponent, especially the human or the night elf, will have to come in to defend with something. And in the defense, units will die. Corpses will be created. More summons will be raised by the undead. And this is always a problem. This is so hit or miss. The Raise Dead is, in my opinion, a flawed design. It is either extremely underwhelming, you raise 4 skeletons only in the mid-game, nobody cares, bro. Or it's completely overwhelming in the late game. Again, it's so binary. Either it's too little, it does nothing, it loses you the game, or it's too much, your opponent cannot possibly hold on, and the game ends right there with the push being successful. Not good design. Very binary. In my opinion, Raise Dead should be reworked. But I'm pretty sure Blizzard will not be agreeing with this, because the fantasy of the Necromancer is there's these hordes and hordes of undead coming up. There's the undead caster, the Necromancer, that raises the dead, one after the next. It sounds good in theory. In fantasy, it sounds good. It sounds like it fulfills the role of the mythic Necromancer, but it's hurtful to the game. These unending masses are hurtful for the game, Blizzard, I think, learned this with Swarm hosts. Kind of in StarCraft 2. The first iteration of Swarm host was horrible. Killed the love for many StarCraft players in Heart of the Swarm. And today Swarm hosts, they have been nerfed, but they're still kind of similar. Summoning skeletons isn't exactly free, it costs mana, but it is so ridiculously cheap that it's almost free if you're in the right situation as the undead. If you're in strong enough of a situation as the undead, it is almost free, and it's so easy to hold on against. And I know what a lot of you are thinking. You don't see all the games like I do, and you haven't seen Necro games in a long time. You're thinking, Remo, what are you talking about? Nobody plays Necros. Yeah, not many people, but some do. And some games, especially from Krav, you can see how strong they can be. And again, Clap is getting nerfed, especially against Mass, especially against Necros. Big deal. Wisps are getting nerfed, especially against Necros. That's a big deal. And I don't want the Mass Necro frustrating, lame push to take over the meta. I really, really think it has to be nerfed. So in my opinion, Raise Dead should be changed to Enhance Dead or something like that. In my opinion, the Necromancer shouldn't raise skeletons. What he should do is buff skeletons, so that the amount of skeletons you can have on the battlefield is controllable. With Necros, it's uncontrollable. Yeah, max of 24 skeletons, but 24 is an insane amount of units. If you change it into Enhanced Skeletons, it would have a direct interaction with Rod of Necromancy. What if, instead of Raise Dead, the Necromancer has Enhance Dead, where, I don't know, in a little circle, you cast a spell, and then the skeletons from the Rod of Necromancy get buffed by HP or damage or move speed or anything. I don't know. But with that interaction, when you have one Necro, his impact on a few skeletons in the mid-game can maybe be something. Without hopefully being too powerful. And the late game, there's not these endless masses of skeletons that can go completely out of control. When you swap the staffs between 3 heroes, the rod I mean, there's a max of 6 skeletons, maybe 8. Maybe 8 skeletons in the game. And then maybe the Necro can buff them, but it's manageable. It's somewhat manageable. Whereas with a lot of wagons and Necros, there might be the first wave of 24 skeletons coming in. They hardly get dealt with. It was super hard. But there's more corpses. There's another 24. There's another 24. It can get out of hand so fast. And Undead is getting some significant buffs here that is going to make the strategy difficult. I know I keep on harping on this point, and Mass Necros don't seem to be a problem at all at the moment, but they might. But I'm pretty sure Blizzard won't go for that change, because it speaks against the fantasy of the Necromancer. The fantasy of the Necromancer just is summoning endless hordes of skeletons. That's how you've read about it in Dungeons and Dragons and in fantasy novels or whatever. That is the idea of the Necromancer, the identity of the Necromancer. But it's hurtful to the game. I think a smarter spell would be Enhanced Dead, like I described, but I realize that's unlikely to see an implementation. In fact, I'm not sure if it would be working out very well in the end. But we need to make sure mass Necro pushes with mass summoning of skeletons aren't too strong. It's hurtful to the game. It's hurtful to the game like liquid fire bats, like mass tanks, and some other lame binary strategies. Okay. This is one thing I'm missing from this patch. Mass Necro pushes, something I'm afraid of, just like tower push meta that I talked about earlier. Oh my god, this video is so long. Okay, I think I really have to pick up the pace here a little bit. Build time reduced on Frostworms. This is the same as I talked about earlier. Chimps, Worms, Griffins, and Wyvern all getting buffed, all getting their cost decreased. I think that's good. These units are underused. A little bit of a buff, I think, is proper. Build time, yep. Gold cost, again, I think this is a little bit too much of a buff. I like the idea, but again, we have to be careful. We don't know which meta it is gonna lead to. We don't want only lame games without actual fighting, without actual interaction. So I think we should take a slower approach. This is a 30 gold reduction. If this was instead 20, yeah, this one 20 instead of 30 would be better. Wyvern, 10 instead of 20. Griffins, 15 instead of 20. And this one, 20 instead of 30. Maybe 15 instead of 30. It's still a decent buff that incentivizes the play of the units, but I think it's a little too much. I think we should take slower steps. Let's take it slow. Let's make it just 15 or 20 gold less, and let's see how it goes. Maybe it sees play. If it doesn't, we can once again incrementally help the unit out a little bit, but we don't want to risk putting everything upside down, especially with so many changes. This is so many sweeping changes at the same time. So yeah, this is the same feedback as before. I like that we're encouraging more air play. They are underused, but I think we should take smaller steps. All right, finally we had to Night Elf. The last race here in the balance changes. Wisp, Detonate, the #1 point of contention. Night Elves were furious, outraged, blasphemous, incredulous at the last week's, 3 weeks ago, the last PTR post, because then it was proposed to reduce mana drain from 50 to 25, which is almost insane, I must say. That would have been a 50% nerf. Now they're going back on this and saying 35 is now the number that they're intending. This is still a really big nerf. 50 to 35. Excuse me. That's a 30% nerf. 30%. I think this is still definitely too much. As I said in my last video, it is warranted to nerf Wisp Detonates. It's a little too strong, but herein lies the important word, a little too strong. Nerf it a little bit. I think a lot of other people said this as well. 40 mana, I think, is a sweet spot. I think even 45 might be proper, but 35, a 30% nerf, I think is too much. 40 also looks nicer, but honestly, I don't care about round numbers, so no concern for me. But this is a big nerf. This is still a very big nerf. When Night Elf isn't getting that many buffs, to be honest. They get a small bear buff, they get a small chimera buff, but that's kind of it. A lot of other races are getting some significant buffs. Okay. This is too much, I think. This should be 40, and I'm pretty sure on that. Especially, this is, again, primarily aimed at Orc versus Night Elf, where it's the biggest problem. Orc is getting serious buffs. They're getting the Great Hall buff. They're getting the Mirror Image buff. They're getting the Wyvern buff. What else am I forgetting? Is there something else? Slight TC nerf. Okay, that's it. Mirror Image, Great Hall, Wyvern. These are significant buffs. Night Elf is already basically getting worse against Orc because of these. You don't want to go too heavy on the Detonate nerfs. I'm pretty damn sure about this. This should be 40. Yeah. Pretty certain on this. And very much in line with that is Archer HP reduced. I don't like that. At all. Not at all. Out of all the changes in this PTR, in this newest version, this is the one I disagree with the most. Archers are very strong against Orc, especially. A little too strong, if we're being honest. Blizzard has stated before that archers are too strong or a problem in many different matchups. And I don't agree. Let's first take a look at the mirror matchup. There we see mostly bottom hunts or bears. A lot of bears are being seen again. We're going to see even more in the future. So there, archers, not really a problem. There's a few archer pushes, but by no means is that dominating the meta. Once again, it's mostly about bears. Against undead, mass archers with expansion can be played, but it's not the most played strategy. It is also a very hard to play strategy. If you mess up, if you're in the wrong position of the map, if you misjudge a fight, if you have to back up, you get chased, Novad, Unholy Aura, everything falls apart. It is very hard to pull off correctly. Moon does it, Yeah, but he's not dominating the undeads. Mass Archer is playable against undead. It's super hard. It's so hard. And I think that's a good place for the Archer. It's playable, but it's by no means dominating. And it's hard as hell to play against undead. So that leaves us with the matchup against human. Against human, Keeper, Naga, Archer, that used to be very strong. Seemed like it was a little too strong, but answers were found. Human, fast expo with a lot of defend footy play into knights in the late game. That is a good way to deal with archers and mountain giants at the same time. Probably the two strongest units that Night Elf has. So why is Archer such a big problem? Archer is only really a problem, and I'm really sure about this, against Orc. There they are a little too strong. Yes, but Orc is getting significant buffs again. Mirror Image, Great Hall, and Windrider. Windrider, of course, won't help against Archer, but maybe for tempo play in the mid-game. Archer are relevant and, in fact, crucial in every matchup. Why are they getting nerfed when only one matchup is the problem? Orc is getting enough buffs to help them against Night Elf. This is already a nerf that will be very severely felt against Orc and also against human. This is, I think, absolutely not proper. Archers are a staple. You need them. You need them to be decent. You need them to be good. Against Orc, they're a little too strong, but it's only against Orc. And Orc is getting buffs already. Let's see how these Orc buffs work out. And this Wisp nerf. Maybe archers are still a problem. Maybe new ways of playing archers are gonna be found. But this is very possibly an over nerf. Bears are getting buffed a little. Chims are getting buffed a little. And that's proper. Wisps are getting nerfed. I think too much. But a nerf is still warranted. Archers, I absolutely disagree. I really like a lot of this patch. I guess I haven't really said this yet. I like a lot of this patch. I like almost all of this patch. I think the numbers should be tweaked in some regards, but I almost like all of this patch. This one I really, really disagree with. Night Elf needs archers. It's also very important against the rifle push, by the way, that the earlier footman push before the rifle push doesn't kill too many archers. Archers are just a staple everywhere. This is like nerfing footies. This is like nerfing fiends. It's like nerfing grunts. This will affect everything when we only want to look at the matchup against Orc. Orc is getting enough buffs. Wisps are getting enough nerfs. Let's see how this goes. Maybe archers are still a little too strong, although I wouldn't even say that they are too strong at the moment, necessarily. This is jumping the gun. This is too much. Alright, this is all. I'm finally done with my archer tangent. But this is absolutely how I feel about this. And I'm, kind of passionate about it, I suppose. Chimera. Yeah, I like this. No gold cost reduction on the Chimera because it's already getting buffed by having its friendly fire splash damage removed, which I talked about before in the previous video that I think is very good. Also, build time decreased. With that, Chimera is definitely quite expensive, but it is a lot better now because of the friendly fire no longer damaging your own units. Yeah, I think this is very good. And with that, we are through with the races. Leaves us with only 2 items left. Tome of Retraining cost reduced from 300 to 200. I think this is wonderful. This makes adjusting interactively in the game to your opponent more easy. It opens up more strategic variety. It opens up more cool plays where heroes show different skill sets. It still comes at a cost. It's not for free, not at all. But it may even enable new strategies, new builds, new hero combos. Maybe, I don't know, you start off with Firelord and Lava Spawn in the late game. You need the right click and the soul burn. I don't know. This has a lot of potential to open up new strategies and new playstyles. And that is absolutely wonderful. Love this, love this, love this. And the next one, I think is pretty weird. Wand of the Wind, I also think is too strong in the right scenario. Wand of the Wind is extremely hit or miss. Against some heroes and some certain armies, this item might be the best in the game if it only comes to one fight. And against other armies, it is absolutely useless. Against, I don't know, Keeper, Mass Dryads, for example, completely useless. It's mostly against Dryads, where it's super useless. But on certain heroes, where timing the perfect spell for the perfect moment is crucial, this item is insanely good. That goes primarily for healers, like Paladin, Shadowhunter, and especially Death Knight, because undead always has to kite back and throw the coil at the perfect time. And other heroes which need to come in the perfect position to get their big spell off to keep them in a fighting chance in the fight. That goes for TC and Mountain King especially. Maybe for Cryptlord, but especially TC and MK. So this item is problematic in the sense that against certain styles and races it does barely anything, and against others it's extremely strong. It has decided so many games, just this single item. And so now the idea is to increase the cooldown from 0 seconds to 5 seconds. This means in the past you used to be able to use all 3 charges right away, no cooldown, and 3 cyclones would be coming up. Now they want to increase the cooldown from 0 to 5, so you need to wait 5 seconds between using the charges of the item. And they say that it's too strong to cyclone 3 units at the same time, which I think is not a problem at all. So first of all, you almost never use it against units, only in rare scenarios. Normally it's always using it against one specific hero. Paladin, DK, Shadowhunter, TC, and Mountain King. And because it's so valuable to use on that one hero, you keep all the charges normally to use on that single hero. In a specific situation also, cycloning up the damage dealer of Lich, Blade Master, or Demon Hunter can be good, but usually these other examples are the primary target. And cyclone heroes last 6 seconds. So you can still cyclone the hero up. The TC could stomp this whole time. TC falls down. You cyclone him again. Falls down. Cyclone him again. Effectively, an 18-second disable. You don't want to use it on many different units. Taking out the TC out of the late game fight is already such a big advantage. Taking the TC out of the fight for 16 seconds, 18 seconds, is way better than taking out the TC for 12 seconds and taking out a grunt for a couple of seconds. This item is usually always reserved for only one hero. In almost every case. In some cases you spam it, but you don't really. So the real strength of this item is disabling the one crucial hero. So this increase in cooldown does basically nothing. I suggested this before, and I am still of the opinion there should be 2 charges instead of 3. It's still extremely powerful against certain heroes like DK, Paladin, Mountain King, TC, but it's not that insane of a disable. It's not 18 seconds, it's 12 seconds if there's no dispel in time. It's still very good, but it's not so insane. So I think this change absolutely does not nerf the item properly. I think reducing charges from 3 to 2 would be the proper way to go about it. Whew, that's finally it. Oh my god, that video is so long. I didn't write down this many notes, so I thought this was going to be faster, but I just keep on yapping. Can't stop yapping. Shout out to everyone who made it to this part of the video. I wonder how many it is. Maybe not too many. Okay, that's it. Whew, finally got through with all the changes. As I mentioned at some time in the middle, I think almost everything in this patch is good. I think some numbers need to be adjusted, but some things we very urgently need to look at. Archer HP, I think this is absolutely misplaced. Mountain King Clap, possibly big problem against necro pushes. Wisp nerf, possibly big problem against necro pushes. We need to make sure the meta doesn't get cancerous. We don't want necro pushes every game. We don't want tower pushes every game. We want long games where one player can react to the other. Interactive play. Ways to draw out the game. Not these binary all-in strategies. I go back to a few points here. Tower repair rate, in my opinion, absolutely not the right approach. Human needs a bit of help, especially against undead. We can give them that help by giving them cheaper tier 3, cheaper Staff of Sanctuary, cheaper... what was it? Sundering Blades. That would be, I think, the way better approach. And also, Necros. I talked a lot about Necros. We need to nerf mass Necro push. Mass skeletons. We need to nerf it. Somehow. Limit the max number of skeletons. Limit the max numbers of corpses the wagons can carry. Limit the regen rate of corpses. If it was up to me, I would implement all these things. Maybe not all of them are needed. The thing is, Necro push strats are never fun. Never. They always end right there. Either the Necro push works or it fails. Again, I think it's a flawed design. I explained earlier how I think Raise Dead should be reworked to enhance Dead, but I know that is very, very likely not gonna happen. But if it's just a dead spell, if Raise Dead is just unusable, that would be better for the game than the way it is right now. Because this can ruin games. I know this is quite the passionate view that I have here, but I very strongly see it that way. I have lived through the cancer meta. I have lived through mass tanks and mass tower pushes and mass talons every single game. One fight and the game is over. You either break him or you don't. Super all in. We don't want that. We want to be able to drag out the game, react to each other, encourage tier 3, encourage 2-base play. That is where Warcraft is the best. Fight on the map for creeps. Not too many run-bys. That is where Warcraft is the healthiest, the most fun, the most engaging. Alright, anything else I didn't mention? Yeah, as I said, I think almost all matchups are addressed properly. The imbalance is addressed properly, especially human versus orc versus night elf seems to be looking good. Although night elf is probably getting a little over-nerfed, as I said. Archers shouldn't be getting nerfed. And yeah, human versus undead. I don't think human is getting enough help. Make tier 3 cheaper, make staff cheaper, make sundering blades cheaper. Oh, I think I didn't say this yet. This would also help human mirror a ton. If tier 3 staff and sundering blades was cheaper, this would also be a great help against spell breakers. Because even with the breaker nerf, we may still see mass breakers. They were so oppressive in the past, even with less armor. They may still dominate the human mirror. If we cheapen tier 3 costs of castle and staff and sundering blades, it would help human mirror and against undead. Alright, I think that's kind of it. Whew, that's a very long video. Thank you all for making it to the end. These are my thoughts. I took quite some time to think about them. I think there was some rambling in there. I think my ideas weren't as coherent as with the last one, because it's just so many changes at the same time. Also, going back to the air changes, I like the attempts of encouraging more airplay, but as I said, this might be dangerous. This might lead less of a fun meta game. I think we should take smaller incremental changes by reducing the gold cost a little less than they proposed. And one thing that I should have said at the beginning, but I will now say at the end, I try to do this myself. Don't just look at this with your own racist, biased sunglasses. Don't just view this as an orc player. Don't just view this as an undead, human, or night elf player. We need to see this globally. I think the Crypt Lord right here is too strong. I know it would help undead win rate, but it's too strong. It would be leading to an unhealthy game. Same for Necros. Not good. Unhealthy. Necro push too strong. I as an undead say this. Crypt Lord and Necros need to be nerfed a little bit more. I talked about the sweet spot about the Necro earlier. And I hope that you guys try to do this as well. Don't just think about your own wins or about your race's wins. We want to have a game as diverse in strategy as possible and as fair as possible. Of course, we all know it's impossible to perfectly balance the game 50-50 across the board, but we want to get as close as we can. And sometimes we have to make concessions where we have to admit that something of our race is too strong and needs to be reined in. And I hope that's something that we can try to stay neutral about, unemotional about, because at the end of the day, the best thing for us is not that our race wins the most. The best thing for us is that it's even across the board as much as possible, and we have a healthy meta, a healthy community, a healthy pro scene, especially. It's also something to be kept in mind. These changes, the most important target isn't how we play on ladder. Like, I don't know, low masters. It's not important that on my skill bracket the win rates are equal. It's important that on the highest level, the skill brackets, the win rates are even. Because you can only balance it around one bracket. And I mean, you have to choose the top bracket because that's the most important one. That's something that not everyone can easily accept, but I'm very sure that it's correct. Yeah, so guys, a lot of feedback has been given. I encourage you all to give feedback as well. Blizzard is listening, as they are clearly showing here. Give your opinion, hopefully informed, but as I said, don't be selfish about this. Don't be self-centered. This is a big ecosystem. This is about the health of our game, the health of the meta. We want to make this as equal as we can, which is not easy. Also, by the way, shout out to the Blizzard devs. It's not easy to find the right ways to do this, to find the right feedback to listen to, lots of different voices, lots of testing required with very little PTR testers, very few PTR testers out there. But they're definitely listening now, which is very impressive, honestly. This is a very clear response to us. And I guess I'm kind of rambling again. But I think this is encouraging. I like most of these changes. I think some need some work still. And I hope that my thoughts helped you, I don't know, inform your opinion in some kind of way. Or at least you found it interesting. I don't know. But yeah, that's it. After way too long, this is the end of the video. Yeah, I thank you all for tuning in. And I hope we'll see you again soon. Twitch.tv/back2warcraft and here on YouTube, of course. Yeah, bye-bye.